Is the payout in the RIA model really 100%? That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is episode number 122. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where I help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition your practice to the RIA model. If you're not already there, if you start out by heading on over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all of the resources I make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, all kinds of things to help you better understand the model. Again, transitiontoria.com. Okay, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about, is the payout in the RIA model really 100%? And that's sometimes what you see out there. That's how it's being positioned. Hey, transition your practice into the RIA model, get 100% payout. And you would think me, the RIA guy, the guy that's all I talk about is the RIA model, would be preaching the same thing. And if you follow along on my episodes, you don't see me leading with that, that you get this 100% payout. And so what I want to talk about on today's episode is where that is factually correct at times, but you got to understand all the nuances that go with it. And oftentimes when you hear the rah-rah headline or in the advertisement about 100% payouts, well, that's true, but you got to know the details that come with it. So that's what today's episode is going to be talking about is the payout really 100%? In some cases it is, which we're going to talk about, but what comes with that? To kind of position this correctly, because there's a couple different ways, as I talk about often on these episodes, that a couple different pathways that you could take to go into the RIA model. When we talk about payouts, and I've done episodes in various topics around payouts you can go back and take a look at as well. But it's important that you're ultimately talking about this in an apples to apples perspective. So, for example, the kind of couple different affiliation models in our industry. So in that traditional wirehouse W-2 quote unquote broker dealer model, there's payouts, right? That is a common thing. There's the compensation plan. Excuse me. There's the comp plan, all those sorts of things. I rant about that in several episodes, some of the nuances of those comp plans. But in that sense, when they are talking about a payout, for the most part, that is saying, hey, you go out there and provide service and provide value for your clients, of which you charge a fee. And we'll just make this conversation on the advisory side of things as opposed to commissions. It's roughly the same, but some differences in technically how you provide advice on the commission side. So I'll just allude to as if this was a fee-based account or fee-based client you're working with. So you're out there, you provide value, provide services to that client. You are charging them a fee, the proverbial 1% AUM fee as an example. And the client pays that fee. And then in the wirehouse world, the payout is essentially ultimately what, for the most part, goes in your pocket. So if it's 100 cents on the dollar comes in from the client, depending on your size, perhaps 40 cents of that, 40% or so, goes into your pocket. Now, out of fairness to the wirehouse firm, they are providing you as the advisor certain things for that 60%, the bigger piece of the pie, that they are retaining. They're providing you an office, they're providing you technology, they're providing you maybe a team member, a staff member. So they are covering certain costs for you. They are taking the lion's share of the fee that the client has paid, and the quote unquote payout is what ultimately comes to you. Now, to make sure we're doing apples to apples all across these affiliation models, keep in mind that what that payout grid says you get is not always accurate in essence, or not always the bottom line. Because as an example, I just did an episode ranting about how wirehouses use deferred compensation typically in their comp plans. Is if the payout grid, the little chart says, you get, because of your production level, you get 40%, but then they might be deferring some of that into the future. So really, maybe only 35% is actually going in your pocket as a true payout. And yes, if you stick around long enough, and yes, if you never leave the firm and so you don't lose any of it along the way, you would eventually get what was deferred. But in today, the income you've earned from providing that service today perhaps in this case, only 35 cents on the dollar goes in your pocket. So in that sense, by definition, the payout is, hey, what is the firm's providing you sort of value and services? They're maybe taking out deferred comp, those things, and the payout is kind of what actually enters your pocket at that point. Now let's shift to the independent broker-dealer model. And that model, the quote-unquote payout, and again, we use the same word, but we're using it in different capacities, so that's what I want to clarify. In the independent broker-dealer model, the payout is much higher than it is in the wirehouse model, but that's also because in turn, in that independent broker-dealer model, you as the advisor control most of your so-called local expenses. So going back to our example, you charge a client a fee, 100% comes in to essentially the independent broker-dealer. They are providing you some value and services just like the wirehouses, but not as much. So they are still providing you generally technology, compliance for better or worse, but they are not, in that independent broker-dealer model, paying for your so-called local expenses. So paying for wherever your office setup is, paying for your staff, paying for your utilities, those sorts of things. And so that payout in the RIA model is, in the independent broker-dealer model is typically much higher than it is in the wirehouse model, but that's because you then need to pay for your local expenses after that. And I'm going to finish the episode talking about why that's actually into your benefit to control your own local expenses. So I'm not suggesting that as if it's a bad thing at all, but the idea being the payout is perhaps say 90%, but from that, then you need to cover your local expenses. And on top of that, to make it even more confusing, I talk about this in some episodes as well, you have to be careful about, okay, is it in that independent broker-dealer model particularly, is that truly all the economics involved from what the client pays to what actually flows to you for you to then deduct your expenses from? So many independent broker-dealers, as an example, and even some wirehouse account scenarios have where there might be a quote-unquote platform fee that the client pays as well. So maybe you charge the client 1% quote-unquote advisor fee, but then your firm also has maybe in an advisory account a 25 basis point platform fee. And you might be managing the assets. This is not necessarily referring to an SMA or something like that, which would clearly have additional costs as well, but just a platform fee for that advisory account. So in this example, the client's maybe paying 100 basis points to you, 25 basis point platform fee, so they're paying 125 basis points all in. However, your payout, that 90% headline number, is not on the 125 basis point fee the client is paying. It's only on the 100% advisor fee of that. So when you run that math, your payout on that all-in number the client pays is typically in maybe the 70% range kind of thing. And even then, you then still have to cover your local expenses. So again, not all account scenarios have a platform fee. Not all firms have a platform fee, but it's something to be mindful of, because if you were to go, for instance, the RIA model, which we're going to talk about, and if you have a client that is able and willing to pay, in this example, 1.25% fee for all the value and services you are providing them. Now, in this case, again, 25 of that's not even going to the grid. It's going to the firm as a platform fee. Only of the 100 is going to the grid. But that client's paying 1.25%. They don't really care who gets paid what behind the scenes. They just say, hey, what am I paying and what do I get in return for that? If you were to go, as an example, not to get ahead of ourselves, to the RIA model, you would say, okay, hey, that client, let's just keep the client fee at that same 1.25%, but now what actually flows to me? And we'll get into that here in a second. But a lot of advisors that I talk to, particularly at independent broker-dealer models, and I'll point out the platform fee, and they say, oh, but I don't pay that, the client pays that. And say, well, yes, that's correct. But what happens if you go in a different path and the client will still pay the same total fee, but you can receive more of that fee yourself? And then again, that's where there starts to become meaningful differences between these platforms. Well, it's a meaningful difference for sure from the wirehouse payout arrangement to the RA model as well. So that's kind of in a rough high level on the independent broker-dealer side. In the RIA model, and there's kind of two pathways here for us to talk about. If you start your own RIA, and as I talk about often in these episodes, there's multiple pathways into the RIA model. You can start your own RIA as one path, you can join an RIA as another path, and there's a third flavor kind of in the middle. I help advisors understand all three. I help advisors explore and go down all three, whichever one might make sense for your particular practice. So my comments are not meant to suggest one is better than the other. It's not. They all have pros and cons. It's to help you. This is what I do. Help you understand how they're different and figure out which path is best for you and your situation, your team, whatever the case is. But in here in today's episode, as I'm talking this through, when we're talking about payouts, if you were to conclude that starting your own RIA is the best path, in that case, yes, the payout, which is not, as I'll clarify, is 100%. And it's actually not even a payout by definition, because what happens with your own RIA is you establish the RIA. This is very high level explanation, but you establish the RIA. Among other things, you get a custodian to hold the client assets. There's all kinds of other things you got to piece together, technology and whatnot. And you have that custodian hold the assets. When it comes time, perhaps you're on a quarterly fee schedule, which most advisors are on. When it comes time to do your quarterly fees, the custodian, that's not revenue for them. That's your fee is not revenue to the custodian, and then they quote unquote pay out 100% to you. It's not the custodian's revenue. It's not the custodian's fee. The only thing the custodian does in that, not to minimize, I mean, they're holding the assets, clearing trades, all that. But when it comes to the fee, the RIA instructs the custodian, it's all automated, done through technology and things like that. Hey, custodian, here's all my clients. Here's how much the quarterly fee for all these clients are. Deduct it out of their accounts and remit the fee to me. So it's not really a payout at all. They are simply, as a courtesy to make it more efficient for you and the clients, taking it out of the accounts per your instructions and giving you the fee that you have generated. You are a business. You have provided a service. There's a fee. Here's the fee. But for whatever reason, it still gets kind of explained as this 100% payout, but that's not effectively, again, what's happening. It is just your fee. Now, from that 100% that flows to you, and it would flow to you, you now need, similar to the kind of that independent broker-dealer model, you need to cover your so-called local expenses. And beyond what the independent broker-dealer arrangement might be, there's additional solutions that you need to solve for as well, such as doing your own compliance. And I talk a lot in these episodes of how you manage that compliance responsibility. But that's an example where not only similar local expenses as you would have like with the independent broker-dealer, but some other pieces as well that are separate items charged. But the idea being, unlike that independent broker-dealer fact, you are keeping 100% of the fees that you generate, and from that, you then work down, what needs to be paid. And so what I always suggest with folks, and I have a little checklist that kind of helps identify this, is to ask yourself, what does your current firm provide for you now? So whether you're at a wirehouse, an independent broker-dealer, whatever your situation is, what does your current firm provide for you now? And they are providing for you things depending on your affiliation model. Could be an office, again, technology, could be staff, marketing support, E&O, whatever the case is. And then if you were to start your own RA, okay, how will I replicate all of those needed pieces? What would that cost me? And then how does that compare to what they're providing me, what they're charging me for? And at its very basic core, that's where transition to the RA model from an economics perspective is, what does your current situation provide for you? How much do they charge? Well, how would you replicate those needed services on your own, and what would that cost you, and what are the differences between the two? So yes, it's 100%, but yes, you have expenses, but generally, and this is why the big migration to the RA model, the bottom line math after you've done all this is generally better than any of these other models, particularly the wirehouse model. Absolutely, almost in every circumstance, is meaningfully better. However, it does come with additional responsibilities, to be clear, that perhaps you don't have in the wirehouse model. So just a quick example, if you're in the wirehouse model, for better or worse, you don't have to worry about the lease on the office or anything to do with furniture or anything like that. You don't have to worry about paying the utility bills. You don't have to worry about the technology or anything like that. They provide it for you. Now, for that, they take the big chunk, the lion's share of the fees and revenue you generate. In the RIA model, you are responsible for each of those. Now, there's 30,000 RIAs out there, not 30,000 advisors in the RIA model. That's hundreds of thousands, 30,000 RIAs. It's entirely doable to put all these pieces together. Again, that's what I help you understand is, okay, what are these pieces? Who are the vendors? How do you manage them? Blah, blah, blah. It's entirely doable, but that is more responsibility than you would have in the wirehouse model. So the equation is then to say, okay, understand, okay, what is the additional responsibility? And then what additional economics do I gain from taking on that responsibility? And what additional flexibility and freedom of my practice do I gain from doing that? And it's both of those could be very meaningfully improved in the RA model, but it does come with that responsibility. You need to understand both sides of that coin. That's a frequent topic of conversation I have with advisors. And then the final kind of payout thing is related to what I just said, is to the degree you say, hey, I do want a lot of the benefits of the RA model, the better economics, the more flexibility, freedom that comes with it, but maybe I don't want to be responsible for as many of those pieces myself, at least to build the tech stack or those sorts of things. So as I talk about often, I mentioned because there's multiple pathways, one pathway you should potentially consider is, okay, should you join an existing RIA solution? Now, this is not, at least what I'm discussed with my audience, this is not just some RIA down the street that has an empty desk in the corner and they'd love to have you come sit in it. That exists out there in different forms. And by all means, if you find that person and you like the corner or the desk in the corner, have at it. I am not referring to where you have to sell your practice to an RIA to join this. That exists as well. There's nothing wrong with that, but that is only appropriate or attractive to advisors at a certain stage in their career, typically more towards the end where they're looking for their succession. Most of my audience is saying, hey, I'm still mid-career. I'm trying to build this. I just want the better economics. I want the more flexibility. And so there are, as I call them, purpose-built RIA platforms that from the start, they were built to say, hey, advisor team, we realize you want all these benefits. You don't necessarily want to have to piece all those things together yourself. So look, we've pieced together, the 60, 70, 80% of all the pieces that you would need. We've bundled it up. We have more scale than you do, so we can get better pricing on things, blah, blah, blah. Here's how we price it. We'd love to talk to you about what this looks like. And under that circumstance, you're still retain 100% ownership of your practice. Your 1099 still control your local expenses. You use your own brand. They're basically kind of your behind the scenes infrastructure partner, if you will. So that exists, all different kinds of flavors. Happy to discuss that with you. But in that world, there is a payout as well. I did a whole separate episode of what is the payout if you join an RA. In short, check out that episode for more details. But the payout can be expressed in different ways. Sometimes it's a percent of revenue. Sometimes it's the inverse of that. Sometimes it's basis points. Sometimes it's a combination of the two. There's not as much uniformity in the RIA model from a payout perspective if you join a firm as there is in the broker-dealer model, where the wirehouses all have pretty similar comp plans and pretty similar grids and that sort of thing. It's much more kind of disparate over in the RIA model. Helping you understand all that, again, what I can help you with. But the idea is they do have a payout. And and what they say is, hey, here's all these things we've bundled up for you. Here's everything we provide. Here's the payout. And from then, you then again still control your local expenses. So that's a different kind of version of payout. So the main takeaway is to confirm, yes, there's a path if you start your own RA that the quote unquote payout, even though it's not really payout, you're just getting the fees that you are generating as a business, is 100%. But careful, that same term payout is used in different ways, as I noted in the wirehouse world, independent broker-dealer world, or maybe joining an RA. And then the final thing I want to leave you with, I mentioned earlier, is the benefits of controlling your local expenses. And so we'll talk about, hey, with the wirehouse world, they do all that stuff for you. And so I think, well, why? Isn't that great if they do it all? Well, they take care of the office for you. They take care of the technology. They take care of all that. Well, that's great, but they also in turn take the lion's share of the revenue that you generate. One, they do have costs associated with that, and two, for providing you that service, they're generating a margin on their revenue as well. That is a path, and that's attractive to many advisors and will remain attractive, no matter how much better the economics could be in an independent path, or better the flexibility and freedom could be. Some advisors just say, I just want to be an advisor. I don't want to deal with all that. I realize I'm making less income. I realize when I sell my practice one day, it's going to be perhaps meaningfully less valued, particularly after taxes. Maybe I have less freedom and flexibility, but hey, it still works for me. I have a nice life. I make a nice income. I'm good. That's fine. That exists. But to the degree you want to take advantage of it, it can be immense. And so one example of being in a more independent path, whether that's independent broker-dealer, your own RA, joining an RA as a 1099, is to control your local expenses, and just a couple highlights of why that's beneficial. The first one is when you control your local expenses, you only pay for what you need. So as an example, if you're starting your own RIA, and okay, putting together the tech stack is one piece of that. I did a separate episode of what is the tech stack. Well, if you're at a firm now and they're providing you with all the technology, and by the way, you're paying for that, you don't get an itemized bill. It's part of the inverse of your payout. Well, they're probably providing you a lot of technology you're not using, right? For better or worse, you're only using some subset of it, but they have all this technology because other advisors are using a different subset. But guess what? Everyone gets charged the same via the payout. If you have your own RA as an example, you can go out there and only pay for, purchase, or implement the technology that you specifically need and want, and everything else you don't get, and everything else you don't pay for either. So being able to control those local expenses is picking what you actually need and only pay for what you actually need. Now, related to that is to only pay for vendors who are helpful, right? So you, as the advisor of the team, even if you're at a wirehouse or independent broker-dealer, those firms should be viewing you as the customer, because you are the customer of theirs. And without you working with your clients, they don't exist. The wirehouse, at least the wealth management side, does not exist without advisors. So everyone at the home office should be viewing you as, what can we do to keep these folks happy? Because we don't want them to leave, because this is the business we're in and they're our customers. Unfortunately, that's not typically how most of the folks at the home office operate. And I've seen it firsthand. It's early in my career. I started at a large broker-dealer, and I was in a compliance department, and you would see people, and then the firm was trying to not have this attitude, but you'd see people like in the compliance department that they didn't view the advisor as the customer. We're out to what has this advisor done wrong? And man, what can we stick them with? Or if it's bad enough, can we get them fired? It's like, hey guys, it's the advisors and this is what my attitude used to be. Hey guys, the advisors are who sign our paycheck. Without them, there is no us. So we still have a job to do, and they need to still follow regulations, but we need to treat them like customers, and try to keep them happy. And unfortunately, it's just not how it typically is actually playing out at a lot of these, large wirehouse tech firms or broker-dealers. In the RIA space, because you're going out there in establishing relationships with all these different vendors, whether it's a compliance solution provider, technology, again, E&O, whoever, if those people are not helpful to you, if they're not responsive to you, if they're not competitive with what's out there, you can fire them and replace them with someone else. That, because you have that local control over what you are going to be paying for. When you're at these large broker-dealer firms, it's just this one-size-fits-all. Take it for better or worse. I mean, the only recourse you have is to leave the firm altogether if one area is not providing you very good value or service. Again, in the RA space, you typically can hire and fire as you need to. So that's another benefit of controlling your local expenses. Another example on local expenses is that because you are controlling all this, you can manage the P&L, the profit and loss statement, the net income statement. So if you want to have a very extravagant office setup and a very beautiful, extravagant office, and you want a very large team, have at it. You can do that. It's your choice. You're controlling your local expenses. However, that is going to make your bottom line net income lower. If instead you say, hey, I want to run a very lean operation and have a reasonable, modest office and a staff that is very efficient, hey, that's going to increase your net income as well. So being able to control your P&L is a huge benefit from local expenses. And then the final example I'll give you, it's not an all-inclusive list on local expenses, and I think this is a huge advantage in the independent space. I did a whole episode on this, is one of the benefits from being able to control what your office arrangement is. Many of you of independent space might lease an office, and that's fine, but there's a pathway, because you're responsible for whatever your office situation is going to be, and maybe you can't do this as part of the transition, but it's a longer term goal, is to own the office you are in, whether it's a building or whatever the case is to own that office building. Because no matter which model you're in, if you're the wirehouse model and you need an office, you're paying for it regardless. You don't get an itemized bill, and it's built into the inverse of your payout. So you're paying for it. And if you stay there for the next 20, 25 years, you are paying for an office, a lease, effectively, for 20, 25 years. And at the end of that, you don't have anything to show from a real estate perspective. If instead you're independent and you say, hey, I need an office and I'm going to be in the game here for another 20 years, I'd rather buy, and I'm going to have an expense. I have to pay either a lease or something to have an office. You have the ability, because you control your local expenses, to buy a building. Again, easier said than done again, but buy a building over the next 20 years, paying down the note of that building if that's how you require it. And then at the end of your career, not only do you have your practice to sell, the value of your book, you also have this real estate asset as well, which could be extraordinarily meaningful addition to your wealth, because you've had this ability to build that up over time. That's just not available in that W-2 broker-dealer world. You get the office, for better or worse. You're not building equity in that office. So that's just another big example of local expenses. Not an all-inclusive list, but I did want to touch on, while we talk about, oh, you get this much higher payout, whether it's independent broker-dealer or RA or join an RA, but oh, you have your local expenses you have to cover. Yes, you have your local expenses to cover, but you generally want to be in charge of those local expenses for some of the reasons I just said. So like I said at the top, my name is Brad Wells with Transition to RIA. This is the sort of thing I help advisors with all day long, is saying, what does your practice look like? What are the economics you have now? And what might the quote unquote payout be in the RIA space? So part of it is helping you understand what all these different pathways are, which might be best for you, how those economics would look depending on which pathway you go down. Happy to have that conversation with you as well. But first things first, if you head on over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all of the resources I make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, all kinds of things to help you better understand the model. And at the top of every page is a contact link. If you click on that, you can instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me, whether you want to talk about today's topic or anything else RIA related. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. Again, transitiontoria.com. And with that, I hope you found value in today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one.